Hello and welcome to Fixed, the podcast by the Fixed Media, where we unpack media insight and take you behind the scenes of editorial decision, strategy, and innovation in the industry. I'm Orsi, and I will be your host today. Before we dive in, subscribe, follow, and if you like what you hear, support us at thefix.media. So today we're going to talk with Fabienne Meijer, an expert on product thinking, and this is also going to be the main topic of our conversation today, product thinking in media. Hello, Fabienne. Thank you so much for joining today.
Hi, thank you for inviting me.
Let's get started. When you hear product thinking in media, what does it mean to you?
So, for me, product thinking is really about creating value. And as product thinkers, we want to create value both for the users and for the organization we're working for. And in our case, users are readers, listeners, people who watch our content. And for a very long time, journalists didn't really have to be that interested in their own audiences because we were making money anyway, and we were usually the gatekeepers of information. But obviously, that has changed. Anyone can be a content creator now, and we're in this 24/7 information space. So we really need to stand out. And in order to do that, we need to listen to the needs of our audience and hopefully be able to convert them into products and stories that will keep them coming back and allow us to remain in business.
What do you think? Like, how is a media product like a website, a newsletter, or a podcast can be different from just being content? How it is different from just content?
Great question. I often get this question as well when I talk to journalists. Um, and I didn't come up with this explanation, but I'm going to use it anyway. So, for a long time, we thought that a single article, a single piece of content was our product. But that's actually not true. And I like to compare it to M&Ms. You don't buy a single M&M in a store. You usually buy a bundle, a package. You'll have hopefully at least 10 M&Ms to kind of keep you satiated. So in a similar style, one single article is not a product. It's at best we call it a project. And then I'm thinking of these huge investigative stories that take months to complete and have all these bells and whistles. And they're a lot of work, and I'm not negating that effort. But at the end of the day, an article, a story has a defined end date, usually the publication date. That's when it goes live. We all have a little celebration maybe around it, and we move on to the next thing. And usually that single article doesn't get maintained. We don't continuously go back to it to update it. But a product is different in the sense that it is potentially unending. It's potentially indefinite. Like think of a website, for example. A website is supposed to exist forever. We're supposed to put our content on there forever. And it changes over time according to our needs, according to the budget might change. We might develop new features if we know that that's important to our users. But the product itself is very stable. And another difference between a single article and a product is that usually for single articles, we don't think before writing that article or like developing that story what the impact is or the outcomes that we're hoping to achieve. At best, we really think this story is important to cover because we think people deserve to know this information, but usually it doesn't go beyond that. Whereas with a product, I'm a product manager and I manage our website. I'm continuously thinking about what are the success metrics here? How can I turn this product into something that will help us achieve our business goals? So those are a couple of important distinctions between articles or like single pieces of content and a broader product.
Could you maybe give a more specific example? Like, can you illustrate a media product thinking with a few specific examples?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think the best place to start this distinction is where you start the conversation. So, oftentimes, when I talk to journalists, media professionals, makers, they start from their own perspective. They're starting from this is what I think is interesting. This is the information I think that matters. This is what we need. When I talk to newsrooms who are in trouble, they're like, we are in trouble because people stop reading our newspaper or because they stop subscribing to us. And so we need to convince people to read our newspaper again. And it's like, that is exactly the wrong place to start because it starts from us, from ourselves, and we're not thinking about the needs of the person who is supposed to consume our content or buy our subscription. So if you want to do product thinking right, you have to start with your audience, with your user, your customer, and see the world from their perspective first. I always talk about creating empathy for the people who you're supposed to be serving. Because even when we think we know a lot about our audience, we often operate from assumptions because we think we know things, but we don't actually check them. So the first step is always, who is my audience? What do I know about them? What do I think I know about them? And what do I definitely not know? And then go out into the world and talk to them, gain empathy, get to know them, so that when you come back in your newsroom, you can say, oh, I talked to Marie last week and she mentioned she's this single mom and she's navigating life. And I think we really should write this story because I think it would help her, in her work or in her personal life. And if you flip that switch, if you start thinking from the people, the audience you're trying to serve, rather than from your own business interest or your own personal interest, that's when you start doing product thinking correctly. And then later down the line, obviously we want to, take all that information and bring it back to something that we can create that can sustain our business. But that's step two. And oftentimes we flip that around and we say, let's think about us first and about the user second. And so to make this really concrete, like a very concrete example, um, at OCCRP, I'm the product manager for our website, like I said, and that means that we actually have two audience members. We have our end user, the person who doesn't work at OCCRP, but they consume our content. But our other audience member, our other user, is actually the editor, the person who makes the articles, because we build a CMS for them. So we're constantly trying to divide our attention between what do our editors want and need, and what do our end users want and need. So in some cases, our editors will say, look, we want to have this fancy feature component that can display a cool graphic, and we think that would be really helpful. And in the past, we would build them, no questions asked. This was before I joined. And now we have this whole graveyard of features that the editors used once or twice and then never again. So we spend a lot of money and resources into building things that they never used. And if we would apply product thinking correctly here, we would need to ask them, hey, you say you want this thing, but are you actually going to use it all that much? Because it looks like you only really want this for this one big story. So is there another way we can create this feature for you without us spending $10,000 on creating something you're never going to use again? And similarly, the editors will sometimes want something that we know is not helpful for end users. For example, for a very long time at OCCRP, we organize our stories according to article types. We have features, investigations, we have news stories, and then we have scoops. For editors, these stories make sense. Like they know the different types, they know what they mean, but we talk to our end users and we ask them, can you tell us the difference between all of these stories? And they came up with 100,000 different answers, but none of them were correct because they didn't understand. And so we went back to our editors and we said, look, we've been operating from our own perspective, from our own assumptions about how the world works. But actually, our users don't care whether something is a scoop or a feature. What they care about is this a story about my country? Is this a story about a topic that I'm interested in? And so recently we made that switch from organizing our stories by category to organizing our stories by topic. And we're already seeing a huge difference in how people are engaging with our content.
This sounds like that it's very different to think as an editor and to think as someone who's product thinking. So what do you think, how you can manage this in a newsroom? Because also maybe sometimes in newsrooms, editors have like one sort of idea or the team has an idea. Is it difficult to communicate it with the broader team that, believe us, we know what we are talking about? This is the way to go.
Yeah, no, you're touching upon something that is a continuous challenge. I think being a good communicator is one of the most important things if you're becoming a product manager or doing product work of any kind, because you're working with so many different people who have all these different needs and different perspectives on the world. So, what I try to do in my work is I try to take my stakeholders seriously. So, if the editorial team comes with a need, I don't want to dismiss it outright. because I do want to understand where the need is coming from. But then I will always try to make sure that the editors understand the perspective of the users, because the user is almost never in the room, right? When we have editorial meetings, there is not an audience member in the room who can be like, hey, you just came up with this idea, but actually that's not useful for me at all. So very often we are there to be the stand-in for the user. That's what product managers often do, be a stand-in for the user in the room. So I like to bring user research into my conversations. I sometimes even send people recordings of interviews that I did to show them, look, I talked to a real human. This is what they said. And I've seen that that can be very eye-opening. People were like, oh shit, I didn't realize that that thing that made so much sense in my brain actually does not make sense in their brain at all. So, okay, we need to do this differently. And it's a slow moving process. Doing this won't guarantee success overnight, but you have to start beating that drum of user research, actual people that you can quote, bringing the voice of the user into conversations continuously in a very, I want to say, slightly annoying way to make sure that it gets, that it becomes a regular part of the conversation.
You mentioned that especially now that everything is all the time on and working, because now everything is like all the newspapers, all the magazines are always available and always on. So, what do you think? Why is product thinking becoming so essential for media organization in today's very digital environment?
If we go back a couple decades, when everything was not so digital, it was much harder for us to get information across. You had a couple of newspapers, maybe a local one, a national one, a regional one, perhaps, a couple of broadcasting stations, TV, radio, and that was it. And so if you wanted to learn about the outside world, those are really the only channels you could go through. And all those channels are mediated by journalists. So we have become very comfortable in that position of if people want information, they will come to us. And at that time, obviously, we had a very valuable audience, and it was really easy for us to monetize our journalism with advertisements and subscriptions. And the whole business model made a lot of sense. But then when the internet came along, it became so much cheaper to distribute information than it was before, because newspapers are expensive to print and distribute, but digital is so much cheaper. So we were already kind of lost a little bit of that edge through the internet. And then obviously mobile came, so people could read news on the go. They didn't have to be at home to watch TV or to read a newspaper. They could take their phone along with them, watch videos on the train, or read articles on the train in a very easy way. So that made it cheaper as well and made us less of a gatekeeper. And then when AI came along fairly recently, producing content became even cheaper because now you can just ask an AI, an LLM, to generate an article for you, and it may or may not be correct, but it will be there and it will have taken you 5 seconds and whole lot of water, but you don't see that obviously from behind your screen. And so all of these components that we used to have ownership over have now become commodified. Anyone can be a content creator and they can publish it anywhere for free or at very low costs. And so in that digitized world, we need to differentiate ourselves. We need to show to our audiences, hey, we still matter. We can still bring you information that you can't get anywhere else. We can still get you that unique perspective, that unique insight, and you still need to trust us above all of these other potential sources of information. But since there are so many voices anywhere at any time, we get drowned out. And so we have been really slow to adapt to that change. We had years to make peace with the fact that the world was becoming digital, and we really didn't take it seriously until it was already quite a little bit late. And so now we're playing catch up. But obviously, we're in a really tough spot now. So that's, I think, where product thinking has really become more important, because product thinking at its core says if we want to build successful products, if we want to be sustainable, we need to start with user needs first. We need to understand our users first. And that is a whole mindset shift that has been very successful for tech companies, for example. And so we're slowly seeing that adoption in newsrooms, but it is going slower than I would like.
Talking about these sort of approaches, let's say, because I think product thinking is an approach to different problems that maybe a newsroom can face. So, can you share maybe some specific publishers that are especially strong in product thinking?
So I'm a big fan of Rest of World. They are an English language publication. They're fully digital. They cover everything except the US, which is why they're called the Rest of World, because a lot of English focused, a lot of English language based outlets are very American focused. They have an amazing product team. Their website is very inspirational for us. We at OTCRP, we often look at Rest of World for like interesting tidbits. I also love The Verge, their tech website. They have recently, I want to say like a year and a half ago, they kind of completely rebranded their whole homepage. If you go there now, it's like a revival of the 90s. Remember when homepages were like fun and you had all these different cursors and like colors and bits and bops? And, you know, over time, everything has become so corporate and kind of sleek and minimal. And The Verge was like, no, we're going to bring the 90s back. We're going to make it fun again. And you really see that that gives them a lot more personality. And that's also why people flock to them, not because they just have good journalism, because they do, but also because their products are like nice and they're a great experience. And I think um, that is really important nowadays. It's not just about creating amazing stories, it's also about the whole package of, is this product nice to engage with? Do I enjoy visiting this website or like visiting this app? A third example is one closer to home, The Correspondence. It's a Dutch outlet. They had a little stint in the US. It was called The Correspondent. um, they are really here in the Netherlands, kind of breaking ground. They have been breaking ground with digital first, slow moving news. So, in a similar vein, like something like Tortoise in the UK has a similar vibe. It's like unbreaking the news. We're trying to give you broader perspectives. We're trying to let you think about news differently. And again, their website product is really outstanding in how smooth it works, how well designed it is. And for example, if you go to the Daily Mail website, like that's a horrendous piece of website. It's just a splattering of content all over the place. It's terrible to consume. And I know they have high traffic volume, so obviously people can, you know, still find their way on the website. But if we're doing product thinking right, we're not just thinking about making great stories, we're also thinking about making a great experience for users. And those three websites do that really well.
Let's talk about this holy trinity of what newsroom wants, right? The audience growth, sustainability, and business models. What do you think? How does product thinking can influence these things?
So I think product thinking is really central to all of these things, because product thinking is this kind of holy trinity, like you said, of like user, journalism, and business. And so it sits kind of in the middle. And I see this in my own work as well. I am pulled in a lot of different directions. On one day, I'm thinking about technical decisions, which features are we going to build on the website, what is going to take priority. But then the next day, I'm talking to our audience team about, hey, how can we ensure that this new video project that we're trying to pull off reaches the right people? Who are we trying to do this for? I'm advocating in my own newsroom a lot about audience segmentation, making sure that we don't see our audience as one big monolith, but that we understand that we have many different audiences that we serve or could serve, and that they all have different needs. And then on a third day, I'll be talking with our management team about the business case around, hey, maybe we need to spin up a new YouTube channel because we can make money that way. Um, and if we serve the right audience, then we will hit the right spot in terms of content, and then we can add a new revenue stream. So product thinking sits across all of these different aspects. And I think the biggest challenge for any product person is getting enough influence in the room so that all these different people want to listen to you and want to be connected to you, because that will give you the biggest leverage. And the way to do that is to start with small experiments to show that your way of working, your way of thinking has merit. You can't really immediately take on the biggest problems in the organization. You have to start small, create small wins for yourself, make yourself visible, and then people will start to listen to you more because they see that you're not just talking a talk, you're also walking the walk. Um, but yeah, I think applying product thinking to all the big problems of our time, of our industry, is really beneficial and actually very crucial if we want to survive.
Listening to you, I can really see that Product thinking should not be something very complicated, but yet it still has these big aha moments. Like this is some sort of the same situation when we have to ask ourselves that when we want to help someone, does the person actually ask for help, right? Not just offering whatever we think that they need. So what do you think? Why newsrooms in general maybe still fail to view the platform as products rather than like a content pipeline? So why is it so difficult for newsrooms to adapt to this sort of thinking?
Oh, I mean, that's a good question. I think there are a couple of things at play. First of all, there's this, we've been doing this for X amount of years. Why not keep doing it? Because it seems to be working. Because a lot of these kind of crises are very slow moving. In the Netherlands here, for example, um, print is kind of still doing okay. Newspapers make the most revenue with their print subscriptions, so they're really hesitant to invest more money in their digital operations because it doesn't give them as much revenue currently, even though we all know, we can see the writing on the wall. Like print is going out of fashion. It won't disappear, but it won't give them the same kind of revenue that they're getting now because the people who have the subscriptions are literally dying. So there's one like inertia, like, oh, we've been doing it for so long this way, let's keep doing this. That's one angle. The other angle is that people are afraid of trying something different because it requires such a mindset shift. Like I said, like you're shifting from a maker's perspective to an audience perspective. And obviously, people are like, well, but if we let the audience dictate what we should write, then we're only going to get stories about scandals and puppies. And even though that is pertinently not true, like we know that audiences are just as interested and educated and informed and want to be challenged the same way journalists do, but they have different needs because they have different lives. A friend of mine used to say, only journalists want to know everything. And so, if we look at the world from that perspective, we think, oh, people want to know everything. Another great example, during COVID times, I was working in a newsroom where they had a reader panel, and they would ask that panel every week, like, what questions about COVID or any other subject are on your mind right now? And the same questions would come up week after week. And journalists in the room would be like, well, we answered that last week. We have an article about that. But other people don't read the news 24/7. They don't know our whole archive by heart. They don't necessarily know that that story was already written, or they're not in the know with the latest developments. So if we put ourselves in the shoes of the user, then we see that sometimes telling a story again is not necessarily a bad thing if a lot of people still have questions about that story. But again, that requires a mindset shift that is so foreign from how people have operated for so many years that it's really hard to make that change. And then the third issue that I see is that people think product management sounds like something that requires a lot of investment upfront. Like you need to have a department and you need to have tools and you need to have tech and you need to be proficient in AI. And none of that is true. But if that's the mindset you're going in with and you don't have any money and any resources, you're like, well, we can't do that. So we can't have product management. But in my workshops, because I teach product thinking a lot to journalists and media professionals, I try to give people 5 questions that they can use in any context and can adapt to any context. So even if you're a freelance journalist and you don't really have a team or a company that you work for, you can still use those 5 questions to start doing product thinking. Because I always say product thinking is like math. Not that it makes people cry, but you have to practice.
Like in the episode, sounds like we're a great match, and we couldn't be happier. If you'd like to strengthen our bond, support us by donating or joining our membership program. That's it. No more interruptions. Back to the episode.
And more or less, because I'm sure that you can't really share these 5 questions, but more or less, like what are these questions are focusing on, and how the journalists are reacting to that.
So roughly, they're about who is your audience, what is their need, what is their problem, who are you, and why are you uniquely qualified to solve that problem for them. What is your biggest assumption right now, or your biggest insecurity, and what are you going to do to test that assumption or solve that insecurity? And the challenge with journalists, especially, is that they take issue with the word problem. They will say, well, my users don't have any problems, or I don't write stories to solve problems. I'm like, okay, well, problem is a negative word, so I understand that, but it's actually about needs or goals. And I always refer to the fridge. You don't have a fridge in your house just because it looks nice. You don't have a fridge in your house because you're like, well, whatever. It just, it came with the house. I don't ever use it. You have a fridge because of a very specific job you want it to do. You want it to keep your groceries cool, or your beer cold, or your fruit fresh for longer. So every item you buy, every service you buy serves a purpose. It does a job for you. The same way when we seek out information, whether it's for free or whether we buy it, it's because it serves a purpose for us. And if we understand that purpose, what purpose people have when they seek out our stories, then we can help people get the right information and feel more fulfilled by the stories we write. For example, I was talking to a journalist. She wrote a lot of human interest stories, and one of the latest projects she was working on was about a woman who was abused. And I asked her, like, who do you want to write this story for? And she was like, I don't know, maybe for women who also had that experience. I'm like, okay, great. So how do you think you could write that story in such a way that when they read it, they're like, yes, this has helped me, or this has made me feel better, or this has given me information to act that I maybe didn't have before. And then she was like, oh, well, if you look at it that way, then I think I understand what you mean when you say the problem you're trying to solve. So I think that's where the biggest challenge is. The other ones are pretty self explanatory, but getting journalists to understand that stories help solve problems or fulfill needs, there is like a step, a mental shift that you need to make.
Besides this mental shift, what do you think? What kind of skills or capabilities are needed for a newsroom to develop a strong product thinking, or even not just to develop, but like at least to start it?
Yeah. I mean, communication, like I said, is really important for any product manager. And this sounds strange because journalists are communicators by trade, but for some reason, we're not really good at communicating among ourselves. So many news orgs are so siloed, right? Different teams don't talk to each other. That's a huge problem. So I think one of the first things you can do is bring people from different teams in a room and talk about stories that are coming out. I'm just thinking, start with a project. Start with a big project that you know like is coming up in a couple of months, rather than waiting to the last minute to involve the graphics department, for example. Bring them in at the start, even though you don't yet know what the story is going to be about. Have them be aware that the story is coming and help them like understand this is kind of roughly where we're going with this. Can we start developing some storyboards maybe, or like some ideas of graphics and how we can involve them? And you'll see that as soon as you do that, as soon as you make people part of the conversation early on, they will bring their expertise and bring perspectives that you would have never thought of, and your product will look so different and probably so much better than if you had only involved them at the very last second. So mindset shift one, communicating second, involving people sooner than you think third.
Do you think that newsrooms sometimes tend to mix up, let's say, copying other newsrooms with product thinking? Like, let's say they say, oh, like this newsroom is doing this and that, and it works for them. So we might do something similar because it can also maybe work for us. Do you think that they are mixing it up sometimes a bit?
You can just say the New York Times. That's fine. We all know that everyone copies the New York Times. I mean, obviously, yes, I see this all the time, especially with the New York Times. I remember one of our national newspapers here in the Netherlands, they copied their entire New York Times byline structure. And I was like, at least try something else just for once. I know that everyone looks up to the New York Times, and rightfully so. They're amazing. They do all these cool things, but also they have a huge budget. I remember I was at a panel a couple years ago, and there was someone from the New York Times there from the games department, and they told us that games department has 100 people working there just for games. Like some newsrooms don't even have 100 people, let alone just to work on games. Like there is no comparison in the amount of resources and people that the New York Times has. So I think another issue that I see is we are so focused on looking at the Anglo-Saxon part of the media industry. They're the most vocal, obviously. I mean, I always also look at the US, but at the same time, working at OCCRP, I get to meet a lot of fascinating newsrooms from Central Asia or from the Baltics or even further east that are doing these amazing, cool things that we rarely talk about because we're all so focused on the New York Times. So rather than looking at one successful global newsroom and trying to copy everything they do because it works for them, I would say look around uh, and look much more at newsrooms that are similar to your own. If you're a local outlet, look at other local outlets in different countries. If you're a national outlet, look at national outlets of countries that have a similar like size or a similar demographic makeup as your own, or even diametrically opposite. Like look at newsrooms in Southeast Asia to see what they're doing and how it differs from yours. I think good product thinking always involves getting inspired by what other newsrooms are doing. But the step between stealing and inspiring is looking at what they're doing and trying to think, how can I make the translation for my own context? What is working for them and why is it working in their context specifically? What is different about my context and how can I adapt that thing to make it work for my context? I can give you actually an example of a brainstorm that we did recently with our own team because we want to reinvent our homepage. And I asked everyone to bring a non-journalism website that they thought was cool. And so I brought a lamp store. It had nothing to do with journalism, but they had this really cool shop page where you had an overview of all the lamps that they were selling, and there was a toggle on the screen that says light. And by default, it was off, and you just saw photos of all the lamps, the light fixtures, where the light was off. So as you would see them during daytime. But if you clicked on that toggle, the whole site kind of went into this kind of shade, and all the lights were turned on. So it looked like it was evening and you saw all these lights lit up, and it was this satisfying aesthetic experience. And I said, obviously, OCCRP is not, we're not a store, we don't have a shop page. But if we take the essence of this experience, it's the user is in control, it's unobtrusive, it is actually a helpful thing, and it makes us feel satisfied because it looks so nice. So if we take those elements, what is something we can do on our homepage that would give us a similar effect? And so we didn't have the final solution yet, but that's how you can brainstorm, taking inspiration from elsewhere and applying it to your own context.
I think we are arriving to our last question today. I'm wondering how can teams introduce or experiment with this sort of mentality? Because when we are talking about small and medium newsrooms, I think it's very difficult to say that let's have a designated team just for product thinking, because sometimes the team is like 5 people and they can't really lose one person. So what do you think if someone wants to start to work in this sense? What are the first things that even small or medium newsrooms can do to introduce experimentations or with user-centric design into their routines?
User research can be done very cheaply. You can do it for free, but it requires setting aside some time. So obviously, if you can't invest money, you will need to invest time. If you don't want to invest time, then you can't do anything. But it doesn't have to be a huge chunk of time, just some time. So what I would do is try to talk to one person from your audience every week, and it has to be a different person who talks to an audience member. If you already have an existing newsroom, great. Just call someone from your subscriber base, or put a poll on Instagram and get people to give you their email address so that you can give them a call. But talk to one audience member each week, not to talk about your product, to talk about them, their experience, their world. Ask them, hey, what kind of news do you consume? What information needs do you have? Try to understand your audience. That's one thing. Doesn't cost any money, just a little bit of time. Second thing, every time you do something, like say you have a YouTube channel and you put out shorts every other day, rather than just putting them out there and seeing what happens, before you launch a new video, write down an experiment. For example, for this video, we think it will get this amount of reach. This is our expected engagement time. We think we will get this many subscribers to our channel. And you write that down beforehand, which would take you 15 minutes at most. You launch the video just as you were going to do anyway. And then afterwards, you debrief. Did we reach the numbers we thought we were going to reach? And if you didn't, great, that's information. Either you're right or you learned something. And then the trick is to not just take that information like, oh, we were right, we were wrong, but start thinking, why? why were we right, why were we wrong, and then the next time you publish a video, you use that information to adjust your experiment, your hypothesis. So in this setup, you don't need to do anything you weren't planning to do anyway, but you have to make it intentional. Rather than just throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks, the challenge in product thinking is, can we be intentional about what we do, where, why, and when? And so you start by putting that mindset in practice.
Thank you, Fabienne, for your insight, and thank you for joining today's conversation today.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you so much.
To everyone listening, thanks for tuning into Fixed. Subscribe wherever you get your podcast, follow the Fix online, and yes, we're now also on TikTok. Want to support our work? Visit thefix.media and explore our new membership program.